Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 16th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all staying safe. My name is Tanmay Bakshi, and thank you for joining today's episode. Now, before we begin today, I do want to say that this week, very unfortunately, we lost one of the greatest technologists of our time, Fran Allen. Now, Fran was actually the first female IBM fellow and also the first woman to win the Turing Award. You might know that Alan Kay said that those who are really serious about software should make their own hardware, and Fran's work really helped us make hardware that understands software. So this is really inspirational. And speaking of inspiration, usually when anybody related to the field of tech thinks about the relationship between technologists and marketers, they picture the kind of relationship between, say, oil and water, that they simply don't mix, and that they can't. However, I think that not only can they mix, but that they actually should, and that the results of doing so can be absolutely incredible. Now, here's an example. Apple only spends about $1.8 billion on advertising compared to Samsung's $2.1 billion. But what exactly makes Apple's marketing so impactful, as it's known for? It's that the engineers working on the software, working on the technology, are actually working in lockstep with their marketing teams in order to actually make that technology relatable, to make sure their technology isn't just quantifiably powerful, but also to make sure that they can show how it makes a consumer's life qualitatively better. And plus, as a technologist, if you want to be successful, you need to make sure that you can actually convince people that your tech is genuinely capable of solving the problems that you claim it can and that you built it to. And that is precisely why I am so excited to speak to today's special guest, Susan Jain. She has 25 years of experience in the world of marketing, and most recently was IBM's CMO for Middle East and Africa, which also includes Turkey and Pakistan. So, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Susan to the show. Welcome, Susan. How are you?
I'm fabulous. And how are you, Tanmay? It's just really exciting to be here with you today.
Thank you. I'm doing very well, of course. Very excited for today's discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. And you and I have encountered each other in various parts of the world, ranging from New Zealand and Australia to India, most
Yes.
recently in Dubai. So why not North America on a sunny Sunday morning?
That'll be wonderful. Hopefully, COVID lockdown stuff gets better soon, and it would be great to finally meet you in person in North America this time. But getting into it, before we begin, would you like to quickly introduce yourself and sort of the work that you do, what it is that you're passionate about?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I've been a chief marketing officer in IBM for a number of years. Before then, in a software company, and then before that, a two-time entrepreneur. So, have had an interesting career and sometimes taken me places that I didn't expect, but that's
Hmm.
part of the beauty and the adventure of it. And as we'll get into, I think that's part of, an indication of software and tech and how they are actually emulsifying, as you say, and not oil and water anymore.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And you're right, it's all about that adventure, and the things that are unexpected are usually the most fun. So now I want to start off with a bit of a hypothetical to start our discussion today. Now let's just say that I am a technologist at an organization. I'm a developer, and I'm definitely not fond of the world of marketing. As a matter of fact, like a lot of developers, I may not particularly like the marketing team at my organization. What would you say to me as a developer to get me interested or to get me excited about the world of marketing, and why is it important to me? Why should I care?
Sure. Well, fundamentally, everyone is a marketer,
Mm-hmm.
and increasingly, every marketer is a technologist.
Mm-hmm.
So, what may seem like things that are very far apart are actually something that we all can understand and that we all practice on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
It's virtually impossible to be a superb marketer these days without also being a bit of a technologist.
Hmm.
And the other side is also true. If you think, I like to use the example of a job interview.
Hmm.
So if you're going to a job interview, you do your research. Then you make the decision, do I invest maybe in a haircut and a new shirt?
Hmm.
Do I make sure that I get there on time, that I get a good night's sleep? Those are all part of packaging yourself for a successful job interview, which is essentially marketing
Hmm.
in a most simple form.
Hmm.
So we can go on to, how it gets obviously more complex when you're talking about technology, but I think that finding that common meeting ground is important to kick off the discussion.
Yeah, finding that common ground is definitely something that I think is become a more common thread across different teams within businesses today, because I mean, as you mentioned, it's hard to be a successful marketer if you're not a bit of a technologist today, but it also goes the other way around. We're all marketers at the end of the day, trying to convince other people that the work that we do is of value. And sort of to tie into your point, now that we're starting to work with fundamentally more complex technologies like AI or machine learning that increasingly get more and more domain specific, I feel like it's very important that technologists and domain experts really start to work together, right? We can't have them siloed away in organizations like we did up until just a couple of years ago. And even today, a lot of organizations unfortunately still have that same structure. So that's definitely a structure that needs to change. And you're right, it needs to for marketing. You mentioned that technology can help us with the world of marketing, but I want to get to that in a moment. First, I want to take a bit of a step back, continue this sort of thing that I've been talking about as a developer, or now let's say as a researcher, right? As a researcher, I want to know how marketing ties into the research that we do, right? So a couple of episodes ago, we had Sriram Raghavan and Ruchir Puri on the show, and so they're executives at IBM Research. They do a lot of work with actual like AI tech, and we delved pretty deep into the world of AI tech in that episode. Um, However, what I'm interested in is that while, of course, we did touch upon how research teams, for example, tie into product development teams, what role does marketing play from end to end, all the way from beginning, the research of a project, the development of actually integrating it into production and putting it out there? What roles does marketing play end to end in that process?
Yeah, sure. And I was delighted to see your interview with my friend Sri Ram from my days working in India.
Wonderful.
When we did work together, which proves that not working in silos makes the golden opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But, in the end, everything is about outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're a business, whether you're a government, whether you're a nonprofit. I mean, the reason we make things for the world, whether it's technology or other things, is to achieve an outcome. And marketing plays a role, as you're suggesting, throughout the process of making sure, of helping to ensure that the outcome is achieved and that it meets the requirements or the expectations from that prompted the investment in the very beginning to build something.
Mm-hmm.
We use a simple construct in marketing called discover, learn, try, and buy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about that process that a client goes through for anything, and in the case of research, you go even a step ahead of the discover and say, well, what is it that then the client not only wants but actually needs?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is an investment of time, money, and so forth. There are a world of good ideas, but the ones that get purchased are the ones that are really understood, wanted, and needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, marketing can work with research, for example, to identify those opportunities to help be the voice of the client in terms of what is wanted and needed next. And then by doing market research, for example, is a simple example of that. We do listening to the marketplace to hear what the chat is and what clients are talking about and what they need. And if you think about how much the world has changed in a COVID environment,
Mm-hmm.
the speed at which that can happen can be absolutely amazing. So from the very first part of, what is the problem to be solved,
Yes.
to how to help to orchestrate an experience that ends up not only in buying, but also then in success. Because if the outcome isn't achieved, if you bought something that looks pretty and sounded great, but it doesn't actually do what you wanted to, then the dissatisfaction is there. And that's where the loop closes again, to provide the feedback and make sure that that the cycle completes more successfully with the next client.
Very interesting to hear, and I'm specifically interested in what you mentioned around COVID and that sort of disruption that's had on numerous different fields, and technology is definitely one of them. Now, you also mentioned that marketing teams, traditionally, for example, as a developer, I might think marketing's purely responsible for taking what it is that we develop, packaging it, and selling it to a client, but that's not necessarily the case, right? It starts at the very beginning with that research, starting off with what is it that our consumers are saying, what is it that they want, and enabling the research team to actually have that data from which they can decide what it is that they want to do. And there are many different examples of things like this. Uh, One good example within IBM actually might be the IBM Project Debater, right? So Debater,
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, the technology for that barely existed, and over the past couple of years, the IBM Debater teams in Israel and China and Yorktown and all these different geographies have been working together to invent new technologies for debating, and in a world like today's, it's incredibly relevant. And without actually doing that research to figure out not only what is an amazing technical challenge, but something that clients actually will have the need for in the future by the time we're done researching, that's something that really requires a lot of collaboration across teams within an organization. Maybe another good example would be Apple Silicon, something that was recently announced a couple of years ago, back with, I believe, the iPhone 5 or 5S, when Apple switched to 64-bit ARM processors to have the first 64-bit processor in a phone. People were like, what? Why? Why would you want a 64-bit processor on a phone? It doesn't really make that much sense. But then, 7, 8 years later, you realize, oh, this was part of a larger roadmap to put ARM processors in a laptop or in a desktop. So when you have that really incredible collaboration, and when you don't have people just siloed across an organization, then you get all these different thoughts, all these different ideas that I think turn out to be pretty incredible. Now, before we continue, I want to take a quick detour because you mentioned COVID and how it modifies a lot of the different trends within marketing specifically. Just the last episode, we had Joe Speed on, who is the field CTO at AD-Link, and he's been working on numerous different projects. He launched the whole IBM IoT initiative, and what he mentioned about the world of robotics, at least, is that COVID doesn't change anything except for the timelines. So, for example, some use cases that are more relevant in days like now, or in times like these, like, for example, automated, grocery checkout, for example, where you don't need to do human interaction. Those ones will be expedited. Whereas other ones that aren't necessarily as important, like, single passenger, like self-driving cars, those ones might be delayed a little bit. What do you think? Do you agree with that sort of analysis of things don't change as much except for the timelines? And if so, can you give us a bit more of a picture as to how COVID has affected the way that we market technology?
Sure. And I'm going to paraphrase a quote that I like from Alan Adamson, who's a professor at NYU, who said that technology has magnified and accelerated what was always true, and made what we imagine even more possible. I added the last bit about imagination, and
Okay.
you may not be able to see this, but it says imagine up there. And because even if we're imagining how to deal with an unexpected situation, we have the ability to do that. And as you say, with accelerated speed. I was in Dubai and working in the Middle East and Africa when this all happened, but I happened to travel in the 4 weeks prior to India, to the US, both coasts, to Ireland. And so many things are the same, right? The need to be able to continue to, work and live as safely as possible, but at the same time to continue. And what we saw in the case of, in our clients, for example, was that digital transformation initiatives, which is a very broad and sweeping statement, I
Mm-hmm.
know, but, clients coming back and saying, okay, digital transformation has always been important. Now it's urgent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, what that means in terms of what they would actually prioritize is different from case to case, depending on their starting point, their industry, and so forth. But it really did change the mix of priorities. And we're seeing that now in what clients are buying, and we're seeing it in the way businesses are changing. We're seeing it in the way marketing happens. We used to be very reliant upon doing physical events.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as you know, working with us recently in Dubai to do our Middle East journey to cloud, we
Yes.
did the entire thing virtually.
Yes. And that was a really incredible event.
It was. And, we had to pivot quickly. And every time we discover things that we could do even better.
Mm-hmm.
And as the world changes and physical events, marketing events become possible again, we've learned things along the way that will change the way that we mix our marketing to be not only appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
but effective,
Mm-hmm.
because we've
Interesting.
had to look at it from a different perspective. And we found out that, virtual events can be very effective.
Mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely right in the sense that a situation like COVID has kind of forced us to change. It's forced us to look at other avenues and see how we can make them just as effective as the ones that came before them, or even sort of force us to innovate to make them even more effective. Right? Because if we're changing anyway, if we don't have that fear of change, then we have the opportunity to be able to modify and restructure a little bit to make it more effective. For example, with the event that we did in Dubai, which I think was really incredible. With the very unique way it was formatted. You got the little airport with all the different gates where we had all the different session tracks and stuff. I think it was a really creative way of structuring these sessions. And you're right, we're sort of being forced to innovate across domains. This is a common thread that's been coming up throughout the TechLifeSkills series when it came to education, when it came to healthcare, when it comes to all these different things. We've said that COVID has kind of forced us to innovate, and in a way is pushing the boundaries of what we can do, and technology is enabling us to push those boundaries. So this is really interesting stuff, and what I want to do now is sort of take a look at how technology enables us to market more effectively. And I want to start off by asking something about, let's just say, IBM's offerings, right? There are some offerings provided by companies that have a kind of stigma associated with them, right? So one could be, for example, IBM's mainframes, right? A lot of people say, and for many years now we've been hearing the mainframe is dying, but it's really not. And that's like a common thing that just always comes up. People think that, hey, servers are eventually going to phase out mainframes, but a lot of people don't realize that there really is technological innovation going on behind there. It's not like some legacy stuff from many years ago that IBM just keeps selling. There's real innovation. It's one of the only complex instruction set computers you can buy that doesn't have microcode on it. Right? It's amazing stuff. And how exactly do marketing teams work with technologies that have that kind of stigma associated with them? And what's it like selling that kind of technology?
Yes. And, I entered the tech industry right as client server was emerging.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I recall very distinctly, the discussions about whether the mainframe would survive that. Now, the company I was working for didn't survive it, but the
Okay.
mainframe sure did.
Mm-hmm.
And that company actually reinvented itself, under another name, and is now 100% cloud software, I believe. So, getting back to innovation, because innovation, also involves, I was picking blueberries yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of a deviation. You probably weren't expecting that. I was picking blueberries, and I was reminded that you need to look at things from all sides
Mm-hmm.
to get the complete perspective, you know? And if you stand here, you see some blueberries. If you stand over here, you see some blueberries. And it's a 360 view that allows you to do the best possible job. And look, when we're working under normal circumstances, we try to do that. but then we're always trying to move quickly. We think we know what we need to do. And we don't always take the time to consider other alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
And, COVID has very much forced us to do that in pretty much all aspects of life and work. And we'll all fundamentally come out of this and reemerge in a different place. But as marketers, for example, it forced many marketers, into a really hard shift,
Mm-hmm.
a really hard shift. But again, to use the tools, the knowledge, the data that we have, more, I would like to say more creatively and more effectively, rather than going for, the tried and true over
Mm-hmm.
and over and over again, and then maybe morphing it a little bit, using slightly better data analytics to have the attendees at event be 20% better.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thing we might have looked for in the past. I want to have 20% more CEOs at this event, and we'd aim for that, and we'd shoot and we'd do our best, as opposed to stepping back and saying, what is the way that I can use everything at my disposal, the analytics that I have, about customers and about their interest and their intent, the digital capabilities that I have to reach them with the best content that interests them and makes them want to participate, to host the activity using digital platforms, and then to follow up and to make sure that the linkage to our sales teams is as good as possible, so that there is, back to the outcome point, an outcome from the event.
Mm-hmm.
A true business outcome, not just doing a better job of what we know how to do as marketers. So by the time you're over and done with that, you've pretty much used every kind of technology today that exists,
Mm-hmm.
from AI to cloud to edge to, you know, deep algorithmic programmatic modeling. All of that comes together,
Mm-hmm.
um, to make an optimal marketing outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and oh, by the way, to make the experience as good as possible for the client, so that because they still buy from who they like to buy
Yeah.
from. And the human part does come through, but technology is the enabler. And as I mentioned, an accelerator, as we talked about.
Absolutely. And I feel like your advice is I mean, I just gave the example of like mainframes, right? And how, marketing teams go about selling something like that where people are like, really? And I feel like it really applies to all sorts of domains, even something like AI, right?
Yeah.
Because, people have all these concerns about, privacy and where's my data being stored and, what's the bias like in my AI models. So there's a lot of work to also be done from a marketing perspective to be like, oh, when you're talking about artificial intelligence technology, this is how we're working towards solving these issues. This is why it's going to work for your use case. It's not just about one single technology. It's about all these different technologies that have these different issues, and being able to market in a way that convinces people that, hey, this technology really is valuable for you. And speaking of that technology, and now that we've gotten into the world of AI, I want to see how exactly modern technology is enabling us to market better. I know that, targeted advertising, for example, is one of those classic things that goes off whenever you think of like marketing and AI. You think targeted advertising, right? It's a
Yeah.
huge field today, and so my question for you would be, what are some technologies today that are actually empowering, let's say, your marketing teams, to market their products, but also to enable customers to actually find the products they need? Because it's really a two-edge. There's really two problems here. There's marketing, and there's also consumers finding exactly what it is that they need. So, can you give us an idea of the tools that are helping both of those sides?
Sure. And I think you really are a closet marketer at heart there, Tanmay, the more you talk about this. So, um, well, so one of the interesting aspects about technology, purchasing today, that makes the marketing process, even, arguably even more important than it's been historically, is that roughly in general, about 60% of the buying decision, or the buying journey, as we call it, going back to the discover, learn, try, buy. About 60% of that is completed before the client usually actually reaches out and contacts vendors.
Okay.
So going back to, so how do they discover you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
making what you offer eminently discoverable.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in a digital world, one of the interesting elements of that is that it tends to level the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a large company with a well-known brand, sure, people will come and check out what you have when they're starting that um, journey. But there are ways, if you're a very small business also, to capture their attention. You get the right search word marketing going is a very basic thing. You have the content that appeals to them, whether you deliver it on your web page or through a webinar or face-to-face interaction or push advertising. All of those things can be done by businesses both large and small, as opposed to old buying behaviors, which were a little bit more limited to who you know about.
Mm-hmm.
But now you can find out about anyone, and in many cases you can purchase from anyone anywhere in the world. And so specific technologies such as that help you with that search and discovery process, um, are just the beginning of the marketing adventure that we go through, and on a modern basis, and it goes all the way through. But then the technologies that you use, the skills that you need, vary as the client is going through that journey.
Absolutely. And now that you've mentioned this, now that we've talked a little bit about these AI tools, another thought just sort of popped into my head, and I was like, with every use case, there's always conflicting interests, right? There's different people that want different things from the technology that they're using. And one of those examples would be, and let's actually go back just for the sake of discussion to that targeted advertising example that I was giving you a moment ago. There is some controversy around targeted advertising and just how ethical it is. And, Google and Facebook and a couple of other companies, for example, have sort of criticized Apple because Apple, with their new WebKit framework, has made it really, really difficult for advertisers to fingerprint different browsers and to enable very specific targeted advertising. What do you think consumers should think about of this? Why is it advantageous for a consumer? I know that the sort of marketing we're talking about is with businesses, but even down to a consumer level, what are the advantages versus disadvantages of enabling this kind of targeted advertising or not enabling it? These sorts of things.
Well, I'll begin with the fact that I'm an internal optimist, so I tend to look at the positive
Yes.
in things. And certainly, with every technology, there are opportunities for people with less than positive intentions to misuse them.
Mm-hmm.
But we're all busy,
Mm-hmm.
and our world is very complex. And there are things that we want and desire that we may not even know that we want and desire
Mm-hmm.
until they
Mm-hmm.
present themselves to us.
Mm-hmm.
So the beauty and the power in the technology behind modern marketing is an ability to marry those two things in a helpful and productive way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, there are lines in how their practice vary from country to country, and appropriateness varies from culture to culture
Mm-hmm.
as well. But the to me, the opportunity to for all of us to be more successful professionally, if we're making a business buying decision, personally, when we're outside of our work environment, to help our children, our relatives, and to help the world be a better place, are there, with the right judicious use.
Mm-hmm.
And those debates will go on, in US Congress and in countries all over the world about where the lines are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as an individual, going back to your question, you know, be aware. I think
Mm-hmm.
everyone who's on your series, is smart enough to know
Yeah.
exactly what they're doing and when they turn their locator on in their phone and when they maybe don't, and what permissions they give and what permissions they don't. Um, but also help the people who may not understand it as much be aware
Mm-hmm.
too. Um, I mean, it's pretty basic advice, but in the meantime, I'm a huge believer in, and this is very much, I think, core to IBM is acting with integrity in everything that we do,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore using information appropriately to help to ensure a better outcome for our clients. Because, as I was doing a little research to think about this, there have been various points in time where marketing has been thought of as, in unattractive ways, as trying to convince people to do things they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now we have the opportunity to help people do what they want to do faster and better
Mm-hmm.
through more and better information, and also maybe to inspire people with things that they hadn't even thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when smartphones came out, I was like, why would I want one of those? I like my little tiny phone. It does what I need to do.
Yeah.
Well, now I have a phone that's bigger than my first desktop computers in terms of its computing power. So,
Wow, that is incredible. You know what you said reminded me of a Steve Jobs quote and ties back to the iPhone that our customers don't know what they want until we show it to them. And that is absolutely true. With targeted advertising, we have the opportunity to transform marketing from trying to sell you something that you may not even necessarily need to actually discovering what it is that you need that you might not even recognize and being able to provide it to you proactively as a benefit to everybody involved. Right. So that's what this AI
yeah,
is enabling us to do, transition
yeah.
in that way.
And that's why marketing is really becoming really is fundamentally about solving problems
Okay.
and achieving outcomes, as
Interesting.
opposed to the old style, which was let me push something out there and get people to buy it.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. The field is definitely shifting, and as the field shifts from the trends of what technology we use, I'm sure that also changes the job roles within the field. It also changes the profiles of the people entering the field, which actually leads me to my next question. So, we've increased the amount of technology that we use within marketing. We've changed the kind of technology we use. How has that changed the jobs within the field and the people who are actually entering it, the people who seem to be passionate about the world of marketing?
Yeah. Um, Immensely, as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to me, again, in the spirit of problem solving, there's always a better way of doing something that you haven't thought of before, and that leads to different kinds of expertise coming together. So in marketing, in IBM, we're huge believers in agile,
Mm-hmm.
and the use of agile, which is another thing that would tie us to developers,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when you have an agile squad, you have a diverse mix of skills, you know, in order to get the job done. And that's the way marketing is now. It's not about some brilliant person sitting around having a better idea. It's about a team working very collaboratively to solve a problem at any of these stages in the buyer journey. And the importance of various skills and capabilities, differs based on at what step you're at. So you may be at an early step where the data analytics are incredibly important to help find out who is discovering you and who isn't, and how long they stay on your web page and what parts of the web page they go to and what part they actually read. And then the content people take over and say, okay, I've got that. I've done A/B testing with content type A and content type B.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the one that works better. I'm going to, dump the A, shoot the B out there, but then I'm also going to try C
Yeah.
to see if it works even better. And, so rather than having sort of the big, brilliant idea and just running with it, it's about constant collaboration and reinvention with creative folks, with, very tech savvy analytical folks, and people who really know the product. Back to your, System Z question. How do you reposition System Z? Well, you have to know what it is, in order to talk about what it can be. And all these come together in a squad to continuously improve the way we market. That's part of what makes it so fun. Every day is an adventure in experimentation and learning and improving. As our CMO says, we need to challenge ourselves every day to figure out what we can do better.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, coming together as developers and engineers and marketers, so that the people who are marketing the products actually know what it is that they're talking about, because that is absolutely critical
Yeah.
in a field like today's. I think that's really important, and it shows, again, as you mentioned, in for example, the job roles. For example, over the past couple of years, we've really seen a lot of new job roles under that developer advocate title. Right? I mean, I have experience being, developer advocate at IBM, and it's really all about being a developer and being someone who codes and gives genuine feedback and thoughts on
Yeah.
services that your company provides, and connecting with the developer, right? Connecting with the people who are actually building the technology. I feel like Twilio been a company that's really led that transition almost in a way. They've been a very developer focused company from the very beginning. Apple as well, Apple and Twilio, and now IBM, as we're starting to see with all the different code patterns that they provide and all their different open source projects, like the AI Fairness Toolkit. These companies are really proving themselves to be leaders in open source, and with roles like the developer advocate one, actually being able to connect with developers and not
Yeah.
just having some random person that doesn't know about the technology telling you the main key points that they got from somebody on the team. Now actually seeing somebody who understands the technology, and that wants you to be able to leverage it, work with you. I feel like that is just on another level. So it's interesting to see how that's shifting today. And we've talked about how it's important for experts to be working with marketers, and how marketers need to be their own sort of experts to be able to sell or to be able to market any kind of tech. But it's not just down to the sort of technical level that we need to specialize in. There's also the regional level, because every different region has sort of different needs, different wants, different requirements, different preferences. And there are sort of almost conflicting interests across different geographies, different places in the world. And I mean, I know that you have been the CMO for the Middle East and Africa regions, and now you're back in the US, and so you've seen a lot of different marketing styles and different cultures, and you've experienced how exactly marketing technology changes across different regions. So can you give me a bit of a better clue as to, first of all, how exactly marketing changes across the globe? Give me some maybe examples that you've experienced, but then also talk about how some of this new technology like AI and machine learning enables more targeted marketing internationally. One thing I will say is that we are getting quite a few different questions from the live stream. We actually got a similar question, which I mean I wanted to ask you anyway, but Tassin also sent in a similar question. How is technology impacting marketing from an international perspective? And so thank you, Tassin, for asking that. We'll be getting into a dedicated live Q&A with the audience in a moment. But yeah, my question. So how exactly is marketing technology different across the globe, and how are new technologies like AI and machine learning enabling better international marketing?
Yeah. So there are multiple levels to this. Some of them are pretty straightforward and obvious, right? So if you're going to be marketing and selling in Japan, it better be in Japanese.
Yes.
And those were the challenges that made marketing, for example, much slower and much more expensive in the past. Now, for example, with you know translation software that can be incredibly good, with research that can help you target the exact buyer you want. So in Japan, for example, perhaps the developer is the one who has the CIO's ear,
Mm-hmm.
in a company that's very tech savvy. And therefore, to your point, if you don't appeal to the developer who the CIO is going to go to and ask for advice about whether to purchase this product or another, or the architecture to use or the way to solve the problem, Understanding those relationships is something you can discover through marketing tools that are available now. And therefore, you can tune your marketing appropriately and not just target the CIO, who's the obvious target, but make sure that all of the people in that sphere of influence are also getting the right message with the content that's relevant to them, because the content to a developer may be very different from what you want to say to a CIO, as you can imagine. You get into certain countries where there are roles that do and don't exist. So if you're marketing security, in general, the target audience is the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. But there are countries where there really aren't very many CISOs yet. What do you do in that instance? How do you tune your marketing to relate to that? And then how do you do it with the content that really resonates in a particular environment? It has to be relevant to people or they don't care. And therefore, the way that you talk about things, COVID, has only magnified this, right? The different situations that face people in different countries, will influence the way that they interpret your messages. Do you provide smiling faces all over the place and people sitting right next to each other? Simple example. And so, and as you can start to see, effective marketing is very complex. Again, technology can help to simplify some of that by doing some of the work that marketers did before, doing it faster, or providing better insights through access to more data in order to do that. And I can tell you, having worked both at Worldwide and IBM and in geographies in Asia and Middle East and Africa, there's always a debate, and it's a healthy one, but it leads to what we call, co-creation of better marketing. Just as you would have co-creation of better software.
Yes.
If you have a team of people who represent, a common problem to be solved, but diverse ways of thinking about it and diverse interests in how it's solved.
Very interesting. We've always heard about that sort of co-creation of software and getting all these different opinions from all these different people, from different, organizations, from different geographies, from different regions to work towards building better software. But it's interesting to see that the same thing happens for marketing, right? Something that happens to be super effective, something that they've discovered in, let's say, Asia. There's no reason why you couldn't take something similar and adapt it to work in North America or in, the Middle East or whatever. While there is, of course, region targeting, and that's very important, we should be learning from all different regions and working together, which, as you mentioned, is what we should be doing in large organizations in order to be effective. Which is definitely very interesting, but I want to sort of scale it back down a little bit before we go ahead and get to some questions from the audience. When we started our discussion today, I asked you this hypothetical question about, if I'm a developer, what would you say to get me excited about marketing? And now I'm excited, but now, as that same technologist, what exactly would you recommend and how would you suggest that I actually go about marketing my cutting edge solutions or my code or my technology? How can I actually go about doing that?
Yes. And as the former founder and president of two small companies that didn't figure out how to do that effectively, I'm here to say, that being very clear about who your audience is, why they should care, and what problem you're solving for them, and why your solution is better, gets down to those basic fundamentals. But, and again, increasingly through technology, that's accessible to companies of all sizes. So the kind of insight and marketing tools, programmatic marketing, is a perfect example. Very small businesses can work with agencies or have the skills in their own companies to do that kind of push advertising that reaches their selected audience based on collected data about interest and intent. and to marry the two,
Mm-hmm.
and to experiment with what works and doesn't, and to constantly improve it. Um, the you know so the good news is the playing field is much more level than it has been before, but
Mm-hmm.
it is a matter of getting back to those basics, and then applying the technology thoughtfully to, to solve the problem, which is to get someone to make an action, take a motion towards buying your and using your technology. And
Mm-hmm.
then I haven't talked about this before, so I do want to make sure to mention it, making sure that doing the work after the effect, the net promoter score survey, it isn't something that you just do because everyone does it. You do it because it teaches you how to be better,
Mm-hmm.
and you listen to that, and then you start the loop again and do even better with the next client or the next rev of your product,
Mm-hmm.
for example. Um, but the best product does not always win.
Yeah, I completely agree, right? It's that combination of not only having a really successful and a really a genuinely amazing product, but also at the same time being able to convince people that what you invented is worth their time, right? And this sort
Yes.
of ties into another question that we actually got from the audience before the episode. It was sent in from Michael Francis. He's asking, what happens when a great product isn't marketed properly? So it's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have two cases where the company ultimately didn't succeed because it wasn't.
Interesting, interesting.
So that can happen, and that's why I'm encouraged that there are increasing opportunities, for smaller businesses as well as large. One going back to work that I did when I was still in graduate school, one of the things that we found in a research team at MIT was that small businesses, you know, are incredible innovators.
Mm-hmm.
Larger businesses often know how to do things such as marketing and selling more effectively. And the ones who figure out when they're small how to do that are usually the ones who end up being large. If not, along the way, you find partners, you hire agencies. There are lots of different ways to solve the problem. Hopefully, you can do that before you fail, because it's always kind of sad to see a great product fail.
Absolutely.
Um,
You're right. I mean, there have been multiple cases of this. I feel like one of them, maybe Transitive Software is a good example. It's a company that, when I say that, basically nobody recognizes it, and that's the entire point. Nobody recognizes that name, right? Transitive Software. If you remember, back when Apple made the transition from PowerPC to Intel processors, they had Rosetta, which was their emulation software that was built by Transitive Software. IBM eventually bought them out and integrated their offerings into the power line for a couple of years before phasing it out. But I feel like had they marketed their solutions better, we would have had more widespread emulation across different processors. But still, it's amazing stuff. But there are also some cases where marketing is a bit too effective.
mhm.
Some examples might be like Juicero, for example. That really famous startup where they had a little machine that would squeeze juice out of a box or a little pack that already had the juice in it. It was $400, and people bought it because they marketed it really, really well. So it's it's interesting. That might be one of the reasons that, again, as you mentioned, marketing gets a bit of a bad rap. But still, it's really interesting to see, how important it is for technologists to be able to market their solutions effectively if they want what it is that they build to actually be something that has an impact.
Yeah,
Now there
yeah.
is another question that we got from the audience. This was before the live stream. This is from Darshini. She's asking, what are the AI and tech skills available for the communications and public relations sectors? And she's also asking a bit more of a technical question. Can we learn any particular programming language to add to the tech factor in our domain of content creation, digital marketing, press relations, and other such allied activities from the communications domain? So, if you have any thoughts on the more technical one as well, I'd love to hear those. But I do have some thoughts. But first, I want to get your thoughts on the AI and tech skills that are important or available for communications and public relations.
Yes. And I'm, you know, more of a marketer than a deep communications and PR person. However, I have managed those teams in the past. And, the first of all is to get comfortable with data.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's less about a particular um, language or even a particular software package, because for everything you want to do, there normally is a world of choice.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to think about, again, what is it that you don't know? Ask that hypothetical question and then figure out how to get the information that will help you to answer the question. And for example, social listening is something that, basically pretty much any company can practice today using any number of tools, which range from almost completely free or free in some cases to incredibly expensive. And you can start by using the ones that are, easy and available. Get your feet wet, find out what is really helpful and what isn't from a social listening perspective, and that will give you clues as to the next thing you need. And again, it goes back to sort of agile problem solving. You don't, there's a ready set answer for every circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
every communication.
Sorry, I think, Susan, we might have lost you there. Sometimes the internet does give us technical difficulties. Let's see. I think Susan might need to leave and come back. Let's give this a couple more seconds. A little while ago we were talking about how we've had to re-engineer a lot of the stuff that we do to work in a COVID environment. I mean, of course, it would have been amazing to actually have Susan in Toronto and do this in person, so we wouldn't have this kind of issue. But looks like Susan will be back in just a moment. Until then, do feel free to send in your questions through the live stream. We're streaming this on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Feel free to send your questions on any of those live streams, and we will go ahead and take a look at them. We are getting some really interesting questions from YouTube so far. We are going to go ahead and answer them in just a moment. All right, so we will be back in just a couple of minutes, right as Susan joins back once the internet's fixed, and we will continue our discussion, answer your questions, and until then, again, feel free to send them in through the live stream. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. In the meanwhile, I did want to go ahead and answer the second question from Darshani. She's asking, what programming languages should we learn in order to add to the tech factor in our domain? Now, there is actually a story that I wanted to share about that. A little while ago, one of my friends, his manager actually gave him a task where he was like, okay, so here's a little bit of text, and there's like a customer ID or something of that sort, and I want you to copy and paste this text 100 times. And I'm not joking. This is actually the task that the manager gave, and to replace the number in that ID from 1 to 100. So make like 100 copies, and in each one go 1, 2, 3, 4, and sort of increment every time. And the first thing I thought was, why is this something that you would even consider doing manually when it could extremely easily be done with a language like even Python, right? Super simple. So my friend went ahead and built a super simple script. Luckily, he knew just enough programming to build that script. And instead of spending, half an hour sitting there and copying and pasting, 100 different times that same text, instead we just had that one script that would find and replace the little X with a little placeholder with a number. And so I would say that, first of all, learning programming in general is something that can really help you in a lot of ways that you might not expect. It's not going to be part of your day-to-day job, of course. For example, within communications, that you're going to be programming all day. You're not going to become a developer. But I believe that once you understand how to speak the computer's language, when you understand those basics, it can really help you in the sense that it enables you to get your work done more efficiently. Of course, it how exactly you're going to be using programming depends, and I would say that the language you learn depends on that domain. I would say that if you're doing something super simple, and if you're doing something like in communications where it's not as technologically complex, then in that case you can, for example, learn a language like Python, where performance doesn't matter. It's super simple. Duck typing. No, it doesn't really care about what you type as long as it makes some kind of sense. Whereas if you're doing something a little bit more high performance, maybe you're doing some analytics, but you don't program, you use tools that already sort of do the analytics for you and do the visualization, then in that case, maybe you want to learn something a little bit more high performance like Julia or Swift, so that you can do your own complex analytics. So I would say that it really depends on the industry, it really depends on what it is that you want to do. But by learning different programming languages, like even something super simple like Python or Ruby, that enables you to be more effective at the work that it is that you do. All right, so I'm currently trying to get a hold of Susan. Let's see if she's able to rejoin the Zoom. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's not an internet issue. Hopefully we can get her back, because there are a couple more questions that I do see that I want to answer. Once again, feel free to send them in through any of the live stream chats. We are monitoring all of them. Again, actually, I see a wonderful comment on LinkedIn from Daniel McKim. He's saying, or the marketing of myth, for instance, of 5G. 5G is being so. Oh yeah, so 5G is being marketed as something that's like against consumers by industry titans, or something that it's not, and that is all in an effort to sell their existing products and technologies. So 5G technology, we know, is genuinely pretty incredible, and really why you would want to use it depends on your use case. There's some use cases that really call for it. There's some that don't, but there's all sorts of myths about the world of 5G, and marketing sort of helps us propel those myths a little more. It even comes down to the fields of, for example, AI. I see Susan's back. We can let her back into the call. All right, Susan's rejoining, but as I was mentioning, artificial intelligence, for example, we see different use cases like Sophia the robot, or different humanoid robots, and we think of real intelligence, whereas it's not, all because of marketing. But Susan, you're back. Welcome back.
Yes, and then occasionally technology fails. So
Yep, but we're glad that you're back finally.
thank you. Sorry about that. I'm
No
used to
worries.
having issues in countries further afield than Atlanta, Georgia. But
All right, but yeah, thank you very much for what I do not actually remember where you were with Darshani's question. If you have your train of thought, then you can continue. Otherwise, Darshani, if you're watching the live stream, feel free to send in any follow up questions, and we'll definitely go ahead and answer them.
yeah. And I think a simple answer to both that one and the earlier question about what you do if a product really isn't taking off. There are lots of specialists out there who are available and willing to talk to people and to help companies to do a better job. So part of it is recognizing that with all of the specialization that there is today, you may want to use an agency if you haven't used one before. You may want to talk to an expert or an influencer if you haven't done that before, because it's really practical. It can help you get to a better solution to your problem.
Thank you for sharing. Now, there is another question from Tassin that I see over here. He's saying, Are we using technology to automate our marketing, or do we still rely on manual workflows to get work done? Actually, I want to sort of expand this question a little bit. And sort of another thought that I had was, within artificial intelligence, we always think, hey, AI is replacing a bunch of humans. And within marketing, I don't think, honestly, that artificial intelligence is going to replace nearly as many jobs as people think it will. And I think it's going to invent more than it ever replaces. But my question for you is within the field of marketing, and this also goes to Tassin's question, what's that level of automation versus manual work versus a couple of years ago with the technology that we use today?
Yeah. Look, in my view, technology is a godsend to marketing because it can do much faster, even more accurately, things that humans used to do that got in the way of doing the fun and creative part of marketing,
Mm-hmm.
which is, again, knowing what you should do, who you're going to direct it to, how you should do it effectively, and when you should do it,
Mm-hmm.
as well as which we haven't talked about. So, I mean, I used to sit and I used to do market research and economic forecasting, and we had a machine that would crank away for 48 hours, to answer fairly simple questions. And that
Mm-hmm.
was modern in its day in the early 90s. Now those things happen in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
And so what I see happening in marketing is that the repetitive work um, you know, can be absolutely replaced by automation. So marketing automation is a commonly used term. You talk about the MarTech stack
Mm-hmm.
that any company would operate, in order to do their marketing more effectively. But to me, it's not man or machine, it's man and machine.
Yeah.
And being able to, again, do things that we could only imagine in the past,
Mm-hmm.
to know, here's a simple example, know who is visiting your website, what they're interested in, what they're not interested in, where they go from that first encounter without having to stop and ask them to fill out a form.
Mm-hmm.
Let alone do a focus group, which was the way we used to try to collect that kind of information before web pages. So, it can all happen so much faster and free people up to do the more creative part that only humans can do effectively. And that is fun to do too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's again, a common thread that's come up so many times on Tech Life Skills. AI and machine learning enables us to be more human, right? It enables us
Mm,
to leverage AI so that we can do the parts that require creativity and the fun parts, the parts that really challenge us to do what it is that we want to do, what makes humans special, and not necessarily the mundane parts that technology could just as easily do for us, but until recently we didn't have the technology to do so.
yeah.
And so, being able to focus on those creative parts is really interesting. And there's some really fun stuff that I'm working on that unfortunately I can't talk about just yet, but do stay tuned for that to learn more
Ah,
about how we're enabling more creative work for humans.
oh,
So,
okay, good.
some
Well,
fun
and,
stuff.
and there's the input part and there's the output too,
Mm-hmm.
because to do, ultimately there is the opportunity to do one-on-one personalized marketing
Mm-hmm.
to any potential buyer that you have out there.
Mm-hmm.
And again, keeping in mind, staying on the right side of the road in terms of privacy and so forth. Um, that's a benefit to the buyer
Mm-hmm.
and also allows you as a marketer to be more effective, waste less, get to your target audience with what they're interested in, and not waste your time with, as we, sort of used to joke about in IBM, but it wasn't completely untrue, the stack of paper that would land on the CIO's desk every morning.
That's really interesting, and that's fascinating to hear about. That's fascinating to hear about for sure. Now, actually, another question related to this that we actually just got from Tassin. What's the most challenging thing you faced while working in the field of marketing?
Mm. I'd say prioritizing.
Okay.
because there is always so much that you could do better and more effectively. But understanding what is the top priority and what's going to have the biggest impact. And particularly if it's a series of events where step 3 may be the one that is ultimately the tipping point. But again, that's where use of technology and data can really help, as opposed to, taking the guesswork out of that decision making. Simple things like what parts of the portfolio are clients most interested in a COVID world, and how is that different from what they were most interested in the day before when it was BAU?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how do they, and what information do they really need in order to progress their buying decision? And how can they receive it if they're now all working at home? And simple thing, you only have their work phone number.
Yeah, very interesting. The field of, I feel like machine learning technology is, first of all, I mean, as we were just talking about just a moment ago, it's enabled humans to be more human within every field.
Mm,
Marketing is definitely one of them. It's enabled us to focus on the things that we need to focus on, that creative aspect. And in turn, it's made marketing not only, cheaper, but also more effective from a business standpoint and also from a consumer standpoint. Going back to what we were talking about before, targeted advertising being a good example. Before marketing got that rap of, you don't necessarily need something, we're going to try and sell it to you anyway. We're going to try and
right.
convince you that you need it until you buy it. And after that, that's your fault. But now we're actually using technology to figure out what it is that consumers want down to an individual level, which before was unheard of. We would try and generalize across demographics. If they're within this age range and they work at this company or they work at this in this role, maybe we want to advertise this thing to them, but we don't necessarily know their situation. And with AI, we do. Right, and with machine learning technology, we have that capability to be able to target our advertisements and our marketing down to the individual level, and it's a win-win situation, right? And of course, while there are issues like privacy, as we've mentioned, eventually that benefit, when technology is used the right way, and once we figure out the regulations, as we mentioned, where we figure out where the line gets redrawn, I feel like the usefulness of this technology really outweighs its risks. Right? There's positives and negatives to every technology, but in some cases the pros are just absolutely worth some of the cons that come with it. So I would like to say, again, if there are any more questions, feel free to send them in through the live stream. We are still monitoring the live stream. But now, Susan, I do want to ask you, and we've got an incredibly diverse audience today, right? We've got all sorts of folks from developers to people in marketing to people in business. So if you wanted to share one sort of closing message with all of them, what would it be?
It would be that, again, I'd go back to the very beginning. We are all marketers, and all marketers are technologists.
Mm-hmm.
And coming together and bringing those capabilities together and bringing those thought processes together towards a common good, towards a better outcome, is the promise that we have and the opportunity that we have. And again, I think for all of us living through the past 6 months, it's obvious in ways it may not have been before, but I just say that, I trained to be a civil engineer, and here I am today. So if I can do it and enjoy it and wake up every morning wanting to do it more and better, then you can too. And if you're a marketer who's never gotten a technology degree or taken a tech class, well, start with the word open and start exploring that, and talk to your friends and your agencies, and you may be very surprised and delighted by what you find.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Susan. That's such a wise message. Thank you very much for sharing. I really appreciate it. I mean, as you mentioned, if you were to think about marketers and technology, think of it like a gradient, and on one end there's technologists, on one end there's marketers, and right in between there's developer advocates. Today it is absolutely impossible to be on the ends of that spectrum, on the poles. You've got to be somewhere in the middle. You might be closer to one end than the other, but you've got to be somewhere within that spectrum where you're sort of a mix between I build technology and I market, or I market but I also know how to use technology to do so better, right? It's a spectrum. Today you cannot have people that only do a single thing. A little while ago, I think maybe in the student special of Tech Life Skills, we brought up the quote, "A jack of all trades, but a master of none is oftentimes better than a master of one." Right? That's the part that
Ah,
people
very
usually,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
people usually drop off that
Oh,
last part of the quote. But
I'll
it,
remember that.
yeah, it really fits with
Well, and
marketing.
particularly, in a world where, people, there's research that IBM and others have conducted that says that people who are in your age group, your
Hmm.
generation, coming into the working world will have an average of 5 different careers.
Wow,
So if you pick just one thing to be, you're running quite a risk.
absolutely.
But, the willingness and the curiosity to continue to learn and reinvent and to try things that maybe you thought were not your forte or out of bounds, you might be surprised at what you find. Again, the civil engineer sitting here, talking about marketing, it can happen, and it can be wonderful. Or
Thank you
you
very
can
much.
try it and do something else instead.
Yeah, absolutely. You should be doing what you're passionate about, right? If you're passionate about the world of marketing, that's what you should be working on, because when you're passionate about something, that perseverance comes automatically, right? That drive to be able to work on it absolutely comes with it. And whether it's technology or marketing, you should be doing what it is that you're passionate about and expanding your boundaries as you gain more experience. So once again,
Totally agree.
thank you very much, Susan. It was an honor to have you on the show. Your insights have, I mean, they've really opened my eyes to this whole world of marketing. And traditionally developers don't really like that stuff, but now I'm starting to see how this what we think of as oil and water are starting to mix, and I feel like this is something that we really need to propagate and enable more developers and more marketers to find out about. So once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate your thoughts, and also a huge thank you to everybody joining the live stream today. Remember, these streams are held in the morning Eastern time, so make sure you join us next week. But we're switching it up a little bit this week. We're actually going to be holding a very special episode this Wednesday, August 12th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We have a surprise guest on the show, and I'm absolutely certain you won't want to miss it. I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint. He's been working in executive roles at major companies who are known for the impact that they've made with technology for over 30 years now. And he's currently the CEO of a major data analytics and consumer research company. So today we talked about, the middle of the pipeline, or the end of the pipeline, marketing, and we also sort of touched upon the beginning of that pipeline, market research. But in Wednesday's episode, we're going to get really deep into that market research aspect. So make sure you join us. Remember, that's in 2 days. And so it's a little bit different. We're doing this in 2 days from now on Wednesday, as well as the usual live stream on Sunday. So make sure you do tune in, and you'll be hearing much more about that episode very soon. But again, thank you very much, Susan. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everybody on the live stream, for listening. And goodbye, everybody.
Go forth and emulsify.
Thank you.